We are live.
Thank you. So good afternoon, folks, and welcome to Marcellus's webinar with Ashoka University. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to this webinar Ashwini Deshpande, the head of the economics department at Ashoka. Welcome to our webinar, Ashwini.
Thanks, Saurabh. Pleasure to be here.
And before we get into Ashwini's part of the webinar where she'll talk about the rise of Indian women, I'll just quickly lay out the sequence of events. We have Ashish Dhawan here. He's the founding trustee of Ashoka. He'll do a quick introduction on what Ashoka has done. Then we'll hand over to Ashwini. She'll talk about the work she's done and the evidence she's seeing on the ground about how rapidly Indian women are ascending. At the halfway point, the 6:30 mark, we'll open up to Q&A. As usual, folks, you can put your questions in that Q&A ka dabba jo hai. You can put the questions in the Q&A box. And my colleague Nandita, who's Marcellus's economist, she'll take your questions. We'll try to get as many questions in the second half of the webinar. And hopefully by the 7 o'clock mark, we would have a good picture on the rise of Indian women. But before we get into the meat of the webinar and to Ashwini's research on the subject, could I request Ashish Dhawan, who's not just the founding trustee of Ashoka, is also a legend in our profession of investing. Could I request Ashish to say a few words on what Ashoka has achieved in its existence? Over to you, Ashish.
Thank you so much, Saurabh, for hosting this. Thank you, Marcellus. And thank you, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate you taking the time out in the evening. I'll request Riva to just put up the slides. And I'll walk you very quickly through the Ashoka journey. Ashoka just completed its 10th year as an institution. So we're still a very, very young institution in the process of being built. And if you just turn to the next slide, you'll see that, we started as an initiative focused on being an interdisciplinary university. We said that in the 21st century, it's very important that students get a broad education. They get exposed to multiple disciplines. And they have choice. So unlike a typical university in India, where if you're studying physics, you just study physics. If you're studying economics, you just study economics. At Ashoka, you get in the bachelor's program, you take a core curriculum, and then you get to explore before you decide what you want to major in. You can even do a minor, you can do other courses. So it's a very well-rounded education and with a unique pedagogy. So our mission really is to build an inclusive institution of excellence in teaching and research, and one that will pioneer interdisciplinary higher ed in India. Already, many other institutions are following the Ashoka model. In fact, NEP 2020, in a way, talks about the Ashoka model because it says all higher education institutions in India by 2040 should be interdisciplinary and holistic. Even IITs now are setting up departments of economics, of humanities, etc., so that their students get a broader education. Our vision is clearly to be the top university in the country. So if you look at our academic programs, which is on the next slide, our core program right now is our undergraduate program. We offer 13 pure majors and 11 interdisciplinary majors. These are students who come from all over India, 400 towns and cities across India. We even get applications from 40 countries outside India. So we have some international students as well. It's quite difficult to get into Ashoka, very selective. And this year we have a batch of 850 students coming in. In addition to our core undergraduate program, we have graduate programs, some master's programs, and an emerging PhD program, about 200 PhD scholars right now. So currently we have about 3,000 students. This slide was from a year ago, 3,000 students, the bulk of which are undergraduates, 80% undergraduates. Our PhD population has grown to about 200. In 6 years, we should double the student base as we go forward. A core value proposition of Ashoka, the reason in 10 years we have such a strong brand across the country, students apply from everywhere, is because of our faculty. We have some of the best professors from around the world who've chosen to join Ashoka University. Ashwini herself was a leading academic at Delhi School. and chose to come to Ashoka. Many others got their PhDs from international institutions, the younger faculty. And immediately after their PhD, they moved to Ashoka. But here on the slide, you see some of the senior faculty, our Chancellor, our Vice Chancellor, and Dr. Vijay Raghavan, who was the Principal Scientific Advisor of the Government of India. When he stepped down 2 years ago, he chose to join Ashoka to help us build our sciences program. Many of these academics are winners of the Infosys Prize, the Bhatnagar Award, leading awards in India. So these are leading lights in our academic system, and they are now at Ashoka. We have about 5,500 alumni. They are now in 38 countries, mostly, of course, in India. Many of them go abroad for higher education after Ashoka, and they have gotten everything from the Rhodes Scholarship to the Gates, the Inlac, Schwarzman, all these leading scholarships across the world, Fulbright. We currently have 24 Ashoka students who are at Harvard, between Harvard Business School, Kennedy School, Ed School, etc. So our students have done very well. In a year, this year, where you must have seen that 38% of IIT graduates have not been placed, we have 100% placement. And it's largely because our students have 21st century skills. They don't have narrow skills. They know how to communicate well. They know they are critical thinking. They have interdisciplinary. They have a love for learning. So these things, these attributes make them very successful in the workplace. And we also, one of the big things we've done in Ashoka is to drive inclusion. Our fees are high. We're a non-profit, but because we want to bring in the best quality, we do have a higher cost structure. So what we have done is to be inclusive. We give away about 100 crore in scholarships every year. Till last year, we've given away 500 crore. This year, it will cross 600 crore cumulatively. About half the students are on financial aid. And many companies have actually financed students with named scholarships who are on financial aid. So we really have had much success in not only getting these students to come to Ashoka, but also in making sure they're integrated and they go on to succeed at Ashoka. So these are a list of some. We actually have about 60 corporate donors to Ashoka who have funded scholarships, physical assets, and intellectual assets. I'll quickly wrap up in a minute or two. We have a wide group of founders, about 200. We are grateful that Saurabh is also a part of our group of founders and donors. Many of them have been leading lights in India, CEOs, founders, etc. This is only a partial list that you see. And unfortunately, all men on this page. There are women too, I can promise you. In terms of physical infrastructure, we have 93 acres. Now we're about 100-acre campus. We are just outside Delhi, 9 kilometers from the Delhi border in Haryana, in Sonipat. We will go from 3,000 to about 8,000 students. We'll also expand our footprint quite a bit. About 5.5, we're 2 million square feet right now. We'll go to 5.5 million square feet. And we cover humanities, social sciences, science, computer science, data science, all these disciplines. And so you can see we have some schools that are listed here. And of course, leading sports facilities. Every undergraduate student lives on campus. So housing, dining, all of that stuff. Students now are choosing to stay at Ashoka or stay in India, come to Ashoka versus going abroad. This year alone, we've had students who have rejected Berkeley, Duke, Urbana-Champaign, London School of Economics to come to Ashoka. They got into these places and Ashoka, they picked Ashoka. We're very, very proud of that. We want to stem the dollar outflow and the brain drain out of India. And just one or two more slides, I'll wrap up if you go ahead. So this is the largest collective philanthropy project in India. Over the course of the last decade, we have raised over 3,000 crore. And our goal is to eventually raise about $1 billion, about 8,000 crore. And people can contribute in every which way, small, medium, big, a scholarship, a physical asset, a faculty chair, research, etc. We want more like-minded individuals to join this movement. This is really a project in the national interest. to build a leading university in India that becomes a role model for interdisciplinary and holistic education. So thank you for giving us the opportunity, Saurabh. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Ashish, and all power to Ashish Dhawan and the other trustees of Ashoka. They're building something remarkable, and glad that in my small way I've been able to contribute. So let me introduce the star of today's webinar. Ashwini Deshpande is the professor and head of economics. She's the head of the economics department at Ashoka. She's also the founding director of something called the Center of Economic Data and Analysis. So my colleague Nandita and I are big users of the Center of Economic Data and Analysis. The stuff that they put on their website is fabulous. It forms part of our newsletters. The book that Nandita and I are publishing next month, a fair bit of the data, and it comes from CEDA. That Ashwini has built. She has a PhD from the Delhi School of Economics, and she's a much felicitated economist. So I won't be able to give you the full list of her honors that she received because of in the interest of time, but here's a few highlights. She's a fellow of the International Economic Association. She's received the Exim Bank Award for Outstanding Dissertation. She's also received the 2007 VKRV Rao for Indian Economists Under 45. Ashwini, it's a pleasure to have you with us on this webinar, and I'll hand proceedings over to you for you to talk about the rise of Indian women. Ashwini, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much, Saurabh. Thanks for the kind introduction. And thank you for inviting me to for this talk today. Let me begin by talking about a sort of an issue that is often in the media and that is very much a part of public discussions, which is about the labor force participation rate of women. So there's a lot of discussion about why are Indian women not in paid work? Why are they not working, right? And there are different points of view, and I'm going to summarize some of those. But if you look at the, the distribution of female labor force, female labor force participation, and this graph shows you the ratio of female to male labor force participation. And so obviously the darker the shade are countries that are doing well in terms of the female-male ratio. And even though this is 2019 and things have changed subsequently to that in India, but India is one of the lower regions in terms of female labor force participation. When you compare India with similar countries in terms of income, etc., right? So that issue is a real one, and we should, genuinely be discussing that and be concerned about that. If you look at the trend over time, however, within India, that earlier map was global. If you look at the trend over time in India, there was a time between 2004-05 to 2017-18 when female labor force participation rate, particularly of rural women, declined. However, there has been an uptick since 18-19, and it's, from up to 22-23 we have data, and female labor force participation rate has been increasing. I've written about how to interpret this number, but today I'm not going to be able to talk about it. But you can look at the CEDA website where I have a piece on explaining this number. Even though there's been an uptick, the current rate is still lower than what we had in 99-2000, which was 50%. So there is an issue here which we ought to be discussing. Now, there is a lot of discussion within academics and in the media about norms. The idea is that, Indian women are not in paid work because the norms are conservative. And prima facie, there is some truth to that. So, for example, if you look at this graph that documents the question of men, proportion of men who would prefer the women in their family to stay at home and take care of the family, whereas they go out and work, which is the belief in what is called the male breadwinner model. South Asia, of which India is a part, is the third largest proportion. So yes, there is an issue with discriminatory attitudes of men, and there's no point in brushing that under the carpet. But that's not the only part that I want to focus on. So I'm going to talk about some things that have actually rapidly changed in India. So norms are not fixed in stone in India. They're not fixed in stone anywhere. So these same male breadwinner attitudes, for example, in Europe, 60, 70 years ago, these were very, very predominant, or in the United States. Today, they are not as predominant. And if you look at even in India, change in norms. So, for example, the proportion of Indian men that are, has the proportion of Indian men likely to be the main decision makers about family issues, whether it's about the wife's visit to natal family, going out with friends and relatives, going out, deciding how the wife spends her money that she earns, etc., etc. In all of these attitudes, there's been an improvement. That is not to say that there's no scope for further improvement, but there has been an improvement in the sense that the proportion of men who exclusively decided on these matters has been going down, and this is national level data. One of the big changes in India, it's a very stunning change, which is the years of education for women. So this maps National Family Health Survey data for over 5 rounds. The first was done in 92-93, and the latest one was 2019-20. And the teal-colored bars where my mouse is going, these are the latest numbers, and the maroon-colored dots are the earliest numbers. Now, you can see a lot of heterogeneity among states, but overall, all the teal-colored bars are to the right of all the maroon-colored bars. In other words, in every state of India, years of education for women has been increasing, and that's something that has documented in all kinds of data. If you look at age at first marriage, again, you see a uniform trend across every single state in India, some more than others. So interstate disparities are real, but the trend is uniform across the country, right? So you see an increase in age at first marriage. You see correspondingly an increase at age at first birth, right? So even if you believe that, women may not really know or they may not truthfully respond to which year they got married, but if you look at age at first birth, there's a birth record, you still see the same picture. So all of these changes are very real, and these are actually norms, I mean, early marriage or child marriage or having a child very early, teenage pregnancies, etc. These things are rapidly changing in India. If you look at the male-female life expectancy difference, right? And so this chart, maps. So on the y-axis here, you have life expectancy of women, and on the x-axis here, you have life expectancy of men. So India is very much along the same, it's on the line where the rest of the world is. So it's not as though in India, life expectancy of men is disproportionately higher than life expectancy of women. Everywhere in the world, women live longer. That's just, natural sort of biological fact. But India is very much on the path, very much on the trend, global trends. So this is a 2021 data. So again, if there was just, very, very conservative social norms against women that you see, for example, in countries like Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia until recently, you would not have seen this picture, right? But you see that India is very much according in the global path. Now, an issue that actually is in the news very much today, which is about sexual violence against women. Now, while the discussion is about, sexual assault at the workplace, or in the Nirbhaya case, it was about sexual assault on the street. The fact is that in India, as everywhere else in the world, the largest proportion of violence against women happens inside the home, either literally inside the home, or the perpetrators are people known to the woman. So they are either intimate partners, or they are fathers, they are uncles, they are within the circle of acquaintances. We focus a lot on outdoor safety, as we absolutely must, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that a lot of a lot of domestic violence happens literally inside the home. And here you see this red bar is India, and the gray bars are different OECD countries. And you can see that India is at the higher end, but there are OECD countries that have intimate partner violence higher than that in India. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when we draw a correlation between intimate partner violence or violence against women and labor force participation rates, that association is not very robust. So we need to be concerned about labor force participation rate. We need to be concerned about violence against women. But to say that X and Y are related to each other, that requires some proof. And I just don't see that. So for example, if you look at the bottom 4 graphs where my mouse is hovering, we have 145 countries here, where we looked at the relationship between female labor force participation rates and different kinds of assaults on women. So, assault per 100,000 population, rapes per 100,000 population, sexual violence, and intimate partner violence. And basically what you see is no pattern, which means that these issues are super, super, super important, and they negatively impact women's lives. But to say that they impact labor force participation rate is not very accurate. And this is true even when you look at the National Crime Records Bureau data for India. So I would say that treat both of these problems very, very seriously, but don't derive a causal association when there isn't. Now, many social norms are improving in India steadily, in fact, faster than what we saw in many other parts of the world. For example, total fertility rate is now at replacement level. And in fact, in many urban settings, fertility rates are similar to what you see in developed countries. Rural women in particular, are increasingly getting involved in livelihood programs. So in about 2019, I think, the total membership of women in rural livelihood programs in India was equal to the total population of Australia and Canada. That's how many women, and these are very, very poor women in rural India, organizing in groups for and to think about livelihoods. Female migration for reasons other than marriage is also increasing, although the major reason why women get migrate is marriage. Okay, not only is female education rising, but the male-female education levels are converging across social groups, across states, across religious groups. In fact, in universities, we often find that classrooms are more female than male, a picture that you would not have seen, 30, 40 years ago. And that's a very real thing. And what I want to highlight today is particularly the fact that we keep on harping about conservative norms, and we must be concerned about some norms that need to change, and I'm going to talk about that. But if the norms were so all prominent, you would not have seen an increase in education levels, including in tertiary education, colleges. So unmarried women are in colleges, in cities, in small towns, and they are entering higher education institutions, despite the fact that all the barriers that we talk about at workplaces, which is lack of transportation, lack of safety, no well-lit streets, etc., all of those problems are faced by college-going women, yet they go to college. And if norms were so conservative, they would not have been able to go to tertiary, because these are all post-pubertal women, remember. All right. There's been a steady improvement in infant mortality rate and maternal mortality rate. Nowhere in the world has women's participation in paid work increased without first a decline in infant mortality rate and maternal mortality rate. The higher risk is the risk of children dying at a very young age, the higher is the number of children that get born, right? So part of the reason that fertility rates have declined is because of this stunning improvement in public health, which India has achieved at a much lower income level than the rest of the world, right? So these are changes that we need to note and be proud of. However, though there are two norms that haven't changed as much. One has not changed at all, which is the one that you see on your graph, which is the female to male ratio of time devoted to domestic work. In India, Pakistan, South Asia, it is predominantly the woman's prerogative to get the domestic work done. Either do it herself or get it done. If you're rich enough, you can hire help, but you still have to get it done. And the amount of work that gets repeated in South Asia on an everyday basis is enormous. 3 fresh meals are cooked, clothes are washed every day, houses are cleaned every day, etc., etc., etc. Many families don't have, tap water or fuel. They just can't turn on a gas, which means you have to collect firewood. You have to collect fuel for cooking, and that adds to the time. And so all of this responsibility falls on women predominantly. And so that's the norm that really, and that's the flip side, I would say, of low labor force participation rate. Because if women have to do all this work, then even if work was available, they would not be able to access it, or access it in a limited way, because they have to get all the domestic work done. The second one, and I'll skip on that because I know that we have to start taking questions, is what is called son preference, right? Now, there is a material basis for son preference, most of all because sons are seen as the children who are going to provide old age support, right? And the marriage patterns are such that when a couple gets married, the bride moves to the house of her husband, right? So that's the sort of kinship structure that we have in India to a large extent. There are nuclear families. And so and marriage is nearly universal. So because of the idea that the girl is going to get married and go, it's paraya dhan. So somebody has called it spending on girls is like a watering a neighbor's garden. You're not going to reap, quote unquote, the benefits of spending on girl, right? But as women's education level is increasing, many families realize that women are just as capable of providing old age support to the parents. Countries like South Korea, China, etc., all of these countries also had very strong son preference. How did it start to change? It's when women joined the labor force, when they became economically independent. Then parents realized that actually women, daughters are, by and large more caring. And so if the daughter is earning, she can as well provide old age support. So the economic value of the daughter starts to increase as women start to participate in the labor force, right? So the argument that I'm making is that I'm not going to talk about unwanted daughters. That's another question. Happy to take that in the Q&A if questions come up, because I need to give some explanations. The challenge in India is what I've shown in the first slide, which is that labor force participation rate of women is low, which is you don't have enough participation in paid work. So my other research, which I cannot show graphs of today, but basically what I argue in my work is that the real reason, the real constraint for women to not be in paid work is what I'm calling the demand side story. Demand as in demand for labor, demand for female labor. There isn't enough demand for female labor. There aren't enough jobs where employers are willing to hire women, particularly in rural India, which is where you saw the decline. What are the kinds of paid employment that women can do? They can do Asha, Anganwadi, school teacher, they can be in construction, or they can work on farms. But rural non-farm paid employment opportunities need to increase. Investors need to invest in low productivity, labor intensive, non-farm work in rural areas, which is how China, South Korea, all of these countries grew, Bangladesh also, right? In urban areas, also in rural, but also in urban, there's clear evidence of employer bias against women. It's either implicit or it's sometimes explicit. You just don't think women are good enough for that job, and so you won't invite, you won't call them to the interview. Or it's implicit, which is you'll have a, networking session after work, or you'll go out for drinks with the boys, etc., where company matters will get discussed, work-related matters will get discussed, but women will be left out because they cannot be a part of that network because they have to get home and get all the work done. And so they get left out, and some managers may not even be aware that they are actually discriminating against women. When women go on maternity leave, which very few companies offer, they get pushed down relative to their male peers in terms of hierarchies, in terms of decision making. The minute managers figure out that the woman is going to go on maternity, she starts to be excluded from several decision making processes. Women have told us that there aren't even actual toilets on every floor of an office building, which means that if she needs to go to a toilet, she has to go all the way down to some floor which is dedicated. And women have special days in the week, in the month, when they need to access toilets more often, or in general, the workplace is not female friendly. So there are all examples of employer bias, plus of course all the barriers that are very well known: lack of decent, fast, safe transportation, absence of childcare facilities either at work or near home, which is actually more useful because carrying you think of Mumbai, carrying your child in a Mumbai local and then depositing the kid at a creche in the in your office is going to be that much harder for the woman to do. So work has to come where the women are, precisely because of the of that norm that I talked about. Now, how do norms change? How did they change in the United States? How did they change in Europe? First, they haven't changed fully, but how did the process start? The lesson that history teaches us is that when women enter paid work in large numbers, norms inside the home begin to change, not the other way around. So you cannot say, okay, norms are bad, so we just are not going to hire women. When women get hired, norms are going to change, because that's the lesson that history has taught us from every single country in the world where women's participation in paid work has increased. And that will have a feedback effect on many of the issues that I talked about earlier. So let me stop here. Thank you, Saurabh and Marcellus, for giving me the opportunity to share my insights. Thank you.
That was brilliant, Ashwini. Thank you so much. So folks, you can put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll try to take as many of them in the next 25 minutes. So Ashwini, I have a question which I'm sort of dying to ask ever since you beamed up that slide on LFPR, labor force participation rising. I think it's your second slide. You show that post-COVID, I think I'll just quickly beam it up. Post-COVID, female labor force participation starts improving, right? And I find this remarkable given the broader employment weakness in our country. This improvement in especially rural labor force participation is quite remarkable, and even more stunningly, this is not being matched on the male side. So what's happening here? Why is rural labor force participation improving so quickly for women, and why isn't it happening in urban, and why isn't it happening for the men?
Yeah. Thank you, Saurabh. I didn't go into the details of this question. And, again, for the listeners, there is an article that I have on the CEDA website precisely on this question. So please feel free to read it. The short answer to this is that there are 2 or 3 reasons that show these numbers. So first is, in 2011-12, NSS used to conduct the Employment Unemployment Survey, EUS. From 17-18 onwards, it started to conduct the Periodic Labor Force Survey, which now happens every year. So the survey questionnaire changed a little bit between 11-12 and 17-18. One of the problems with the earlier questionnaire was that it failed to take into account women's participation in economic activities that was unpaid. So, for example, think of a family where the husband, the family enterprise is farming or fisheries or livestock, right? They are dairy farmers or whatever, right? Now, women take care of the animals, or they take care of the livestock, or if the husband is going out and selling some, gold or golgappa or whatever, all the work that goes into making that product that is getting sold and is giving the income to the family, that work is being done by the women. This is not domestic work. This is paid work. I mean, this is not paid. They are not paid, but this is work that is contributing to the family's income. And so the EUS questionnaire didn't really fully pick up this unpaid economic work, not unpaid domestic work,
right?
Unpaid economic work. So the first increase from 11-12 to 18-19, sort of, not even 18-19, so about 19-20, you see that first increase picks up better measurement. But better measurement, after 18-19, the questionnaire didn't change. So it's not as though it's getting continuously better. What then happens is self-employment, so unpaid helpers in agriculture, this category starts to increase. Now, there is a lot of debate about what this represents. And obviously, one point of view is that, this represents genuine, sudden transformation of the rural economy. My own view is a little pessimistic. I think these were women who were anyway earlier working, but their work was not getting counted.
Right.
In 21-22, and 22-23, you have a clear increase in the category called self-employment. Now, if you look at the earnings of the self-employed women, the proportions of women reporting self-employed has gone up, but the earnings have not gone up. So again, my hunch is that this is, sort of what economists call disguised unemployment, which is you're doing very low productivity, survivalist kind of work, which COVID distress has sort of compelled you to enter into, because if it were really good work, you would have seen an increase in earnings. and you don't see that.
Right.
So while it's very good that the mismeasurement has been corrected, I appreciate that very much. But I think the problem of remunerative paid work, or the lack of remunerative paid work, that problem still remains.
Right.
Right.
So,
So I think,
so in that context, right, one of the things that Nandita and I are trying to wrap our heads around is the RBI data. The RBI publishes data on men के बैंक अकाउंट में कितना पैसा है, women के बैंक अकाउंट में कितना पैसा है, and RBI also publishes data on how many bank accounts do women have, how many bank accounts do men have, and they also slice this data between rural and rural, semi-rural, urban, metropolitan, ऐसा. And what that's showing is in recent years, last 2 साल में, it's showing that women, for the first time in Indian history, women bank accounts have more money than male bank accounts, and the number of women bank accounts seem to be higher than male bank accounts. And we are a little perplexed by that because we are also left with our head scratching, given that employment का एक बड़ा general issue है, and regardless of gender, there seems to be an employment challenge. We're left a little perplexed as to why we are seeing female bank accounts having more money than male in urban areas. I caveat this, it's only happening in urban areas. Any thoughts as to what's going on here? Why are we seeing this rise in bank balances for women?
So I'll have to see the data. I haven't seen it, so I'll have to see it carefully. And but my preliminary thoughts are that a lot of welfare schemes are directed towards women because you want women to have control over the income. And so, a lot of, for example, all the ones that like Ladli type schemes where you start giving money to the young teenage woman and it goes up to when she's 25, etc. Particularly if you delay your marriage, you get, some lump sum, etc. Almost all states have schemes like that. And there are other transfers that women are, so, women as labharthis, like getting government benefits, so obviously any money in anybody's account is good news. But I think what some of us have been arguing is that money coming because the women are earning more through their involvement in paid labor, or is it coming from transfers? And there is no evidence to suggest that proportion of women in paid work in urban areas has gone up.
Right, very interesting. So I think Nandita is the question in the Q&A
Yeah.
box. And folks, whoever else wants to ask a question, please type it in there and Nandita will take it. Go for it, Nandita.
Right. So the question is by Mr. Bhuvan Gupta. He's asking whether there's any correlation between productivity or profitability of companies with the ratio of female to male people or employees in that company. And the second part to that question is, does Marcellus take any investment decisions basis the contribution of female employees in the way that they're treated in specific companies?
So I'll answer the second one, but I think Ashwini, I'll ask you to answer the more interesting first.
So, thank you for this question. The thing is that there are studies that have looked at proportion of women in boards of companies as well as proportion of female employees, and have looked at various bottom line indicators like profitability, etc., right, assets and things like that. Now, there is a positive correlation there, but you must remember that you don't know which way the causation is going. Is it women employees or women board members contributing to different strategies and that leading to a profitability? Or is it that companies that are already comfortable are doing well? They feel like, okay, if we break the trend and, if we have more diverse workforces, because now we have, we're not worried about our bottom line any longer. So obviously, given my views, I'd like to interpret the causation in one way. But in the interest of rigor, I must say that establishing which way the causation flows, it could flow both ways, which is that companies that are already, comfortable, profitable, maybe they're doing something different anyway. Maybe their board members are more empathetic or whatever, I don't know. Maybe they are involved in sectors. So therefore, I would say for gender equality reasons, you should have more women, both on boards as well as at the employee level, at all levels within the company, not just as, secretaries and stenographers, but at all levels, particularly in decision-making roles.
Right. So Ashwini, just to chime in there before Saurabh goes on to answer the second part, whilst I was researching for the book, I came across this really interesting report by the BCG, which stated that this was across the world. It's not specific to India. I think it's for the US. But what it stated was that in all the companies which are funded, and those which are actually headed or spearheaded by a woman, at least one woman in the leadership team, they get lesser funding on an average, but they in turn can generate higher revenues than the ones which are just headed by men. So that, I think, was a very powerful indicator, and I think we should do some analysis to understand whether this holds true for Indian situation or not. But I thought that that could also answer the causality bit that you were just discussing.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nandita.
Yeah.
So to answer Bhuvan, the second part of Bhuvanji's question. So here is what I have, and it's a remarkable sort of sequence of events I'm going to tell you. So Bhuvan, to be perfectly honest, we are not so enlightened. We are not so enlightened that we have a ratio of female male ratio before we take an investment decision. So it was our oversight. But then something remarkable happened. Around a year ago, one of the largest pension funds in the world came to diligence us. So they came to Mumbai, they met us, etc. And then they said, give us the names of the stocks you've invested in, and the pension fund has enormous databases that they can dive into about how are these companies, how are the Marcellus investee companies from an environmental perspective, उनके emissions क्या है, carbon footprint क्या है, male female ratio क्या है, maternity policies क्या है, etc. So this is a Canadian pension plan, giant pension plan. They actually have a managing director, lady based out of Toronto. Her job is to ensure that their investments are not just profitable, not just lucrative for the pension plan, but the Canadian pension plan is also this said Canadian pension plan is also very concerned about, are the investee companies doing the right thing in terms of environment, society, economic impact, and so on. So they then organized the call with us. So they chose us for the mandate. That met 25 Indian investment houses, and they chose us. They chose to give us the mandate, and they set up a call with us where that the lady who runs their what's called ESG, the managing director who runs their ESG practice, she said that of all the Indian portfolios they had seen, ours was the one where the companies were the most woman friendly in terms of employment policies, had the lowest emissions, and had the lowest incidence of industrial accidents. Now, the reason I was stunned by this is this was not something I had pre-programmed. It wasn't as if Marcellus wakes up in the morning and says, "Aaj hum invest karenge in companies that treat women well, have lower emissions, look after their workers well." But I think the lesson I learned from it, is if you invest in companies which are ethical, where the promoters don't steal money, where corporate governance is of a high order, where customers are given a fair deal. If you invest in companies which have a mindset that we'll do the right thing by the customer, by the shareholders, other positive outcomes are a happy byproduct of that. So it's not something male female ratio is not something we take explicit account of, but if you look at a company like Titan, which is a big part of our portfolio, both visiting Titan stores, Tanishq stores, and when you visit their headquarters in Bangalore, it's very evident that that company has a very high proportion of women in senior roles, and in the entire hierarchy of the firm, there are women in positions of significance and influence. Nandita, back to you.
Yeah. So the next question is by Ms. Trupti Parashar, and it's something that we all have sort of struggled to understand, and that was the logical counter in many of the data points that we saw. So Ms. Parashar is saying that in many cases, men usually put their money in their wives' accounts to hide their real income for income tax reason or some other reason, and taking advantage. Isn't it a possibility that this is exactly what is happening, and that's optically increasing the amount of money in women's account?
What do you think, Ashwini? Is this why women's accounts have more
So
money than?
that you'll have to show that that tendency for men to do that has increased over time. I mean, if some men do it, then there would always be the case that some women will had money in their accounts because their husbands were trying to distribute it across different accounts, right? So I don't know. Is there any reason to believe that
No,
in the
in fact,
last 4-5 years
Ulta,
that tendency has gone up?
I think to buttress Ashwini argument, Ashwini, it's become very hard to do that. If you earn black money as a man, if you earn black money as a man and you stick it in your wife's account, unless it's a very small amount of black money, right, 2-3 lakh. If it's a meaningful amount of black money, the income tax department will come calling on her and say, "Batao, paisa kahan se aaya?"
Especially if she's not earning, and
Exactly.
if
So
she has a bank balance of 20 lakhs, then
yeah. So in the post
you
GST world, in the post GST world where the income tax department is now very high tech, the notion that men are laundering effectively, the notion that men are laundering through their wives' accounts, uh, I think thoda sa stretched ho jata hai.
mushkil.
And Ashwini also said, if that was the case, that if Indian men have a propensity to launder through their wives' accounts, why would the propensity have gone up in recent years, given that enforcement and detection has actually improved in recent years? Back to you, Nandita.
Yeah, so the next question is by Mr. Ranjit. He's asking whether there's any study or any view that has come which actually measures the quality of life improving because women are in positions of power, like for say in a government or a leader of the company, or for example, states which are ruled by CMs who are women, safety, pay, etc. On all these indicators, is there any improvement just because the head of the state is a woman?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Actually, if you look at the local level, panchayat level, there is very clear evidence that having women as sarpanches, originally when the 1990, 93, when seats were reserved for SC/STs and women, there was this thing of, oh, these will be just rubber stamp, women. Basically, the husband will be the mukhia and the woman will be running the show just as a rubber stamp. And indeed, there were examples of that kind. But over time, women have realized the agency that they have by becoming sarpanches. And there's a lot of research now showing that at the local level, having a woman as a mukhia, as a sarpanch, does because women tend to prioritize things like water and education, etc. So that does make a difference. Quality of life is a very loose term. So I would quantify that by saying what is it that we can expect an improvement in. By the time you come to the state government or prime ministership, at that level, first of all, there are few and far between. Secondly, a state government leader, say the chief minister, that person alone doesn't run the state. There are bureaucrats, there are ministers, there are MPs, MLAs in different constituencies. Now, if most of them are men, and there's this woman chief minister at the helm, she might try to do something different. And that is also complicated by the fact that all chief ministers are representative of some political party or the other, right? So they are not there only as women. They are there as representatives of their particular parties. And there is limited autonomy that you can exercise. So if your party has a particular call, you as a member of that party is going to follow that, right? And so the ability of chief ministers to set a completely independent agenda, particularly if it goes contrary to the party that you belong to, that's limited. So we must understand the compulsions of politics. However, at local levels where there are fewer, barriers between the woman and the people towards whom the policies are getting made, you do see an improvement. And certainly in companies, that evidence is pretty clear that as proportion of women in boards goes up, or if female CEOs, not too many, but if they are, then you do see a difference in the way the companies run, in terms of the workplaces being female friendly, etc. That you can see. Quality of life is a very is a bit of a tall ask. When we don't expect improvement in quality of life from male politicians, why should we expect that? I mean, I'm not saying it's a wrong expectation, but let's ask our male politicians to improve our quality of lives, right? They dominate the political scene. So how about they start improving quality of life first?
Fair
Well,
enough. Yeah. So the next question is by Salil. So he's asking if you can share any interesting examples or cases of some government initiatives, can be at the state or central level, which have worked really well for women in rural areas. I mean, it could be some monetary or non-monetary nudges, which you think, in your view, have worked.
I mean, if we come back to the question, what I'd said in response to the bank account question also, you might think of women as a group that needs support, that needs some transfers. And in the absence of anything else, that's not a bad idea. If women want to work and there is no work available, then at least some transfer should be given so that the woman can, manage. However, women are just as capable and as hardworking and as intelligent. And they are just like men, except that they are women. That's all, right? And so, what I'm trying to say is that if you think men are worthy of being in paid employment, so are women. And as I showed you the graph from education, as women's education increase, their aspirations increase. They can do more. They've seen the world. They've read books. Their capabilities have increased. So this Labharthi mentality for women only, why? That let's think of women as a constituency that need to be protected, that need to be given something. Yeah, there are many schemes that given. I'm happy for those because in the absence of anything else, at least women there's a floor, So social safety nets have a very strong role to play. But women, just like men, not all women want to be in social safety nets, right? I mean, I'd rather be in a paid job than wait for my, welfare check from the government, which if I didn't have a job, I would be grateful for that welfare check. But if I'm intelligent, if I have studied, if I have the capability, I want to work, I want to use my productive potential. So 50% of India's population is female. And if a large part of half your population is not in productive work, you're underutilizing the productive potential of your population. I mean, I care about gender equality, but hypothetically, if you didn't care about it, you still need to involve women in economic work, right? So there are schemes galore, and as I said, those are, if in the absence of anything else, those schemes are very much needed. But women are not only Labharthis. Women are adult,
Right.
capable, intelligent, productive, brave, uh, independent beings, and we should be treated like that.
Right. So that's a very nice thought, but I have a follow up on that. For as long as I can remember, even going back 10, 15 years ago, we've been hearing that women on education parameters have been doing far better than their male counterparts. It's been a reality of life ever since I can remember. 10, 15 years ago, that was a reality. It's a reality even now. However, if you look at the FLFPR, it doesn't, the educational superiority does not really get translated into that FLFPR number. Even though there's a gap of, let's say, 10 years or even 15 years in between. So in 2007-8, if you would see that women are doing well, they should ideally be in the labor force by at least 2019, 2020. So why do you think that disparity still exists? I mean, there's enough gap in between the two, and yet you don't see a really reasonable increase in FLFPR. So in that case, don't they need that support from the government?
No, of course. As I said before, if you are not earning, you must, as a safety net, everybody must get that support, women and men, right? So I'm a big supporter of safety net programs, by the way, whether it's NREGA, whether it is, the Antyodaya Yojana, whatever it is, ICDS scheme that gives vaccinations, prenatal care, postnatal care to women, Asha's, the Asha network, etc. So I'm in favor of all of these programs, by the way. So that's not the point. On education levels, it's the last 20 years, not ever since you probably remember. Things have changed for women in the last 20 years. If you look at FLFP versus education, a graph that I didn't show today, it's a U-shaped curve. So the least educated women and the most educated women have the highest labor force participation. It's the middle educated women that don't have a high labor force participation. And that brings me to the question of jobs. So think of a woman who's done class 8 or class 10. Or class 12, right? She's in a rural India, a rural area. What are the job possibilities for her? I mean, how many Asha and Anganwadi workers can there be in a village? Just two, four, literally four women, right? If there's a school, okay, she hasn't studied that much to be a school teacher because she's just studied between 8 to 12 years, right? She can be a construction worker, but how much construction goes on in rural India? So Saurabh alluded to this, the female labor force participation decline has to be placed in the context of a growing gap between the availability of jobs and between the rate of growth of the working age population. The working age population, male and female, has been steadily increasing. Jobs have not kept pace. So actually, I have a graph, which I didn't show today, where the lines go like this. Not that the gap remains constant, the gap is widening. And that's the period where the women's participation has been falling. Agriculture is the biggest employer of women. So of all the women who are in paid employment, the highest proportion is in agriculture. But as structural change happens, the country is going to move away from agriculture. In fact, we had moved away now in COVID. So part of this increase, Saurabh, in the last few years has also been because the proportion of agriculture in total employment has again risen because of the COVID distress, right? So the fact, Nandita, that women are not in education is not because they don't want to work. Where is the job? So think of a boy who's completed 10 years of education, class 10. He can work as in a mobile shop, repair shop. He can work as a delivery guy. He can work as, chota mota, some roadside shop. Do you see women sitting in these shops? They never hire women. Now, but many of these jobs can be done by women equally well. So now in some petrol pumps, for example, you have women. Now that job can easily be done by somebody who studied up to class 8. Why don't we have women as petrol pump attendants? And so on.
Ashwini,
Toll
on that,
roads,
I
things
just
like
wanted
that.
to sort of chime in with a happy anecdote.
Yeah.
So, if I take Mumbai and so Maharashtra and South, a lot of those jobs are indeed done by women. And I've never been quite able to understand why we see this from Maharashtra down all the way to Tamil Nadu, Kerala. So, for example, today, if you come to Mumbai on BS best buses, a lot of the conductors are women. In South India, most of the road toll on the tollways, if it's not a fast tax, it's an airport car toll. It'll be a woman who'll collect the toll. A lot of the stalls in South India are run by women. I've never quite been able to understand this as to why in peninsular India, say Maharashtra and South, we do see women doing these jobs, but North mein and East mein nahi hota. Any reason for that?
Yeah, so I don't want to make too much of the north-south divide because it's complicated. So there are some graphs that I did not show today, for example, which is that in the NFHS, there is a question about justification for domestic violence. So is it justified for the husband to beat his wife if the roti is burnt or whatever, things like that. And strangely, in South India and Peninsular India, a greater proportion of men justify domestic violence. That, yeah, if the women don't perform up to expectations, we are justified in beating them. So short answer is that I don't make too much. I mean, I think the North-South story is more complicated. Yeah, it is true that in the South, as a result of several, not even decades, centuries of social reform, which started during the Bhakti period, etc., there is a greater overall social acceptance of.
And is employment outcomes better for women in South India?
No, that's the other thing I was coming
Very
to.
interesting.
That even though there is a social acceptance of women like you go to a city like Pune, you'll see women everywhere, but not in employment. So that brings me again to the demand side story that you don't see, like, in Maharashtrian families, for example, it's in middle class families. I'm not talking about super rich families with 100 servants. In middle class families, it's very common for the dinner to finish. And at 9 o'clock, the wife, the woman, the mother says, okay, I'm going for my play practice. So all of you have eaten, you do your thing. Now I'm going to rehearse a play. And she's performing in a play. She's like some neighbor. So 9 o'clock, you go for your play practice, you come back at 11, and it's completely acceptable. You look at classical musicians, female classical. Maharashtra has the highest proportion of women. So they are traveling on tour, they are performing with. So those kinds of taboos are much lower in the South because of the history of social reform. But now we're getting into more complicated territory.
So I think we'll need.
It still doesn't translate into employment because of the demand side.
I think we'll need a second webinar with Ashwini Deshpande in the not too distant future. But thank you so much for doing this. It's a super important subject. It's half of the population. If we can't make half of the population productive, there's obviously a challenge there for the country. I'm sure we'll be able to get to the bottom of this in Nandita's lifetime. Nandita is very young, as you can make out. That's why she said as long as she can remember.
As far as she-
Right. So thank you for doing this. Riva, any final messages? Is there any way that those who want to donate to Ashoka can do so?
Yes, sure. First of all, thank you so much, Saurabh, for hosting us. And of course, Ashwini, thank you for taking out the time. Nandita, thank you so much for your role in organizing everything. Saurabh, you've been supporting us as a donor and as a mentor to our students. So thank you for that. You are well aware that we're doing a lot at Ashoka to bring this kind of education to every corner of the country and to make it accessible for every child, who makes it to Ashoka should get this education. So yes, there are ways in which people in the audience can support us. One, of course, is do reach out to us. I'll be sharing my email ID if you're looking for students for internships and placements. And of course, we are creating a corpus for financial aid and for the build out of our campus. So do reach out to us for that as well. You're aware that we have a very, very strong body of founders, but we have an equally strong body of young people that we need to support more and more. So very quickly, sharing my email ID on the screen. I hope it's visible.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
Do
So
reach out to us at
development
development
at
at Ashoka.
ashoka.edu.in.
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. So thank you very much, folks, for dialing in. Thank you to Ashwini, to Riva, to Ashish earlier on for explaining what Ashoka is doing. Folks, we need this. We need Ashoka to do well. There's a whole bunch of reasons. I could go on and on about it for hours on end. There's a whole bunch of policy issues that the country faces where we need people of the caliber of Ashwini Deshpande to apply their considerable intellect. Please support Ashoka. I do so. I do so in whatever limited way I can. And I look forward to seeing you on the next Ashoka webinar that we'll do in the not too distant future. Thank you very much and have a great weekend. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.